Hannah feels her feet like lead. Another year, another trip to Shiloh. It should be a wonderful time to offer sacrifices to God with her husband and their family, but it isn't. It's actually an awful time for Hannah, because every year the same thing happens. They go and sacrifice the ritual animal offerings, and then they go to the meal. And Elkanah, her beloved, always gives Hannah a double portion of the meat, which makes his other wife extremely upset. Because his other wife has children and Hannah doesn't. So it's surprising that Hannah is the favorite. And the torments his other wife exacts on Hannah then are extreme. So she dreads it every year. And this year is no different. And it happens just as predicted. The whole way there, Hannah is bothered by all the comments the other woman makes. All of them with some amount of plausible deniability, just talking about her children, motherhood, and each of them a stab wound to Hannah, who says nothing, whose anger is diminished, and who's merely just sad at this point. And then the sacrifice takes place, the dinner is there, she receives the double portion of meat, and it tastes like ash in her mouth. She pushes it around on her plate. And while the whole room is kind of talking, her husband leans over and says, "Come on, Hannah, what's wrong? Aren't I enough for you? We have a good life together. Isn't it enough? Why are you so unsatisfied?" And the tears are just close to the surface for Hannah this year, and she decides that she'll just take an out, and she'll go pray. And so she excuses herself and is grateful for entering the twilight. It hides the anger and the pain. And as Hannah walks, she begins to think about the thing that she wants more than anything. She wants a child, more than anything. More than anything in the world, she wants a child. And it's not possible. And she pauses and thinks about how that grief is for her. And it's a grief only known by other women throughout ages and throughout time who have shared that experience, have shared that deep pain. And she realizes people don't talk about it a lot, but it's very real. And she pauses just to lament all the women who've had that experience, to hold their pain and her pain together because it deserves being acknowledged. And then she walks on, and she begins to think about Elkanah, and he doesn't understand. He just wants to be enough for her, but that's not the grief. He doesn't listen to what she's saying. Her longing is something that doesn't fit into his understanding or his world. And so he doesn't necessarily mean to, but he diminishes it every time. She begins to wonder yet again if maybe she's wrong. Maybe this longing in her heart isn't a good thing. Maybe it's wrong and Elkanah is right. And before she knows it, she's at the temple, the shrine. And she falls on her knees. But she knows that this ache inside of her, deep in her bones, is real and legitimate and honest, and it is who she is, even if it can't be realized. And so I wonder, what do we do? How do we hold those deep, Hannah-like longings that are part of our own souls? We maybe know that they're not going to be realized, like Hannah, but what do we do with them? How do we carry them? How do we speak about them? How do we decide if there's something that just comes from within us and is worthy of our attention? How do we hold the longing? I wonder, too, when we've been Elkanah, when someone else's longings have made us uncomfortable because we don't have a solution for them, we don't have an answer for them, or maybe it's the person we love and we want to be enough, but it's not the same thing. Their longing is in a different place, and that's okay, but we've accidentally diminished it. And we've asked them to change so that we feel more comfortable. Hannah is on her knees at the shrine, and she begins to pray from a deep place like she's never prayed before. Most of the time, the words get stuck somewhere about here, because she doesn't know what to say, and she feels a little bit illegitimate in asking, but today it just spills forth from her soul. And she's so fervent, she doesn't realize that her lips are moving, even though it's just sort of her heart that's pouring out. And the priest, I suppose he's not used to seeing people pray in such a capacity, thinks she's drunk, and so walks by and sneeringly offers a cruel comment. And good for Hannah, because she says, no, that's not actually true. I'm praying out all the sadness and vexation of my life to God. And although the clergy does not offer an apology and does not offer a more pastoral interaction, he at least wishes her peace. And Hannah goes on praying. And it feels like a long time, but she comes to the end of her words. And there's nothing left to say. And she sort of opens her eyes and comes back to the presence, and it's not all that much darker, so not that much time has passed, but she feels something in her has shifted. Something has really qualitatively changed, but she's not sure she can name it. Because in some way she can't express, she knows deep within herself that God has heard. That the empathy she's looked for from others, God has offered to her. And no, there's no answer. And no, there's no solution. But God has heard the deepest longing of her heart and held her and held it. And it's okay for right now. And Hannah rises and begins to walk back through the twilight to where she came from. She can rejoin the meal. She's okay. She's got a new kind of center in herself. And I wonder how often we summon whatever courage is required of us to talk about our deepest longings with the Holy One. What is it that holds us back? Do we think our lives are pretty okay, and so it's a little much for us to ask about this other thing? Or do we feel like maybe God isn't all that concerned, and so, or no one else has offered us empathy, so why would God? And I wonder what it would be like if we found the kind of moment Hannah finds herself in, where she just allows her soul to speak. She allows all of the things inside her just to be present to God. And as it changes Hannah in ways she can't quite name, I wonder how it would change us. I wonder how God would hold us in our deepest place, our place where we're most vulnerable. I wonder how God would show up and hold us if given the chance. It's not long after they return from the sacrifice that Hannah suddenly realizes she's going to have a kid. It's going to happen after all of these years. And she gives birth to this boy named Samuel, whose name means, I have asked it of the Lord. And she sings this incredible song that the choir sang today so beautifully for us. A song that sounds really similar to the one Mary will sing generations later about Jesus. That God is the one who holds the pillars of the earth. God is the one who lifts up the lowly and guards the faithful. Hannah just sings from the depths of her soul because she's so overjoyed. And it isn't necessarily easy now. She's vowed to give this child to God, and she'll only see him once a year, but God heard her cry. The longing of her heart was realized. It's a beautiful moment. And I wonder in what ways, and throughout our lives, the longings of our hearts have been realized by God. And have we made time to sing a song of salvation, to sing a song of joy? Because something about that changes us also. Something about knowing that the God who is bigger than we can imagine has seen us and heard the cry of our own soul. It's a moment for joy. But I've walked in the world long enough, and I'm sure you've walked in the world long enough to know that not every longing of our hearts ends with what we desire like it does for Hannah. And I wonder what we do with that. I wonder how we continue to walk with God and trust that God does hear us, that God hears and knows us intimately. But perhaps it's not always as easy as the Hannah story. And how do we wait with God? How do we wait for God for a time or for a lifetime? How do we find the longings of our hearts held and maybe not satisfied in the way we wanted or the way we imagine? But is it enough to know that God holds us, to know that God hears us, to know that God cares for us? We're not Hannah. I hope none of us are Eli, myself mostly. And we're not Elkanah. But these stories in Scripture are narratives for a reason, because stories speak to us. They help us see our own lives in a different light. And I wonder how this story is speaking to me and to you today. I wonder how we see ourselves in the Hannah story, and what about it calls us to prayer, or calls us to celebration, calls us to waiting, or just calls us to know that whoever we are and wherever we are, God does hear us, and God does care about us now and always.